a statistic you bring up in your book. In 2011, the Public Religion Research Institute conducted a survey of Americans of all faith backgrounds and asked them, could a politician who behaved immorally in their personal life still perform their public duties with integrity? Only 30% of white evangelicals said yes at that time. That's the lowest of any group surveyed. Then, 5 years later in 2016, they released a new survey, the exact same question. 72% of white evangelicals agreed with the statement, the highest number ever surveyed. So the question is, why do you think white evangelicals abandoned character as something that they want to see in a politician?
Desperate times call for desperate measures. Right? I mean, that's what a lot of these folks will tell you. They will say, sure, we were horrified by Bill Clinton's behavior. Sure, we issued calls for a return to morality in public life, that we held character up to be this prerequisite for public office. Yes, we did that. But that was back during the good times, when our churches were safe and when America was still a good, godly nation and when our Judeo-Christian heritage wasn't hanging in the balance. But now we are under siege. And because we are under siege, all bets are off. The old rules no longer apply. This idea that because we're persecuted or because we're under siege as Christians in America, that gives us license to somehow set aside the biblical commands to turn the other cheek and to love your neighbor as yourself and to pray for your enemies. It's just nonsense.
I know you brought up Doug Wilson previously, but he argued the slave trade was unbiblical, but slavery was not. There was the usual song and dance of, oh, but the slaves were given food, they received good medical care, yada, yada. He said slave owners are on, quote, firm scriptural ground. That was another eye-opening moment. The birther movement was really big in evangelical circles. And then, of course, the presidency of Barack Obama, you would write, would strengthen evangelicals' sense of embattlement and embolden the more militant voices in the movement. I know we touched on Reagan and his impact, but what was the impact of Barack Obama being elected?
Oh, yeah. First, just to not lose this point of views on slavery and white supremacy, as we're seeing some shocking things these days. There's also a longer history here, and the kind of neo-Confederate movement that we see. There has been a lot of kind of overlap between some, not all, but some of these conservative right-wing traditions. And Robert Dabney is a 19th century theologian, a white supremacist who remains popular in these spaces. And, Doug Wilson perpetuates some of these ideas. Many others do as well. Many evangelicals do not embrace explicit racism. Instead, they have embraced what goes by the name of, kind of colorblindness. They have embraced the idea that we're all children of God, so we shouldn't talk about race. To talk about race is to be is to divide. And so what you see happening then is there are some people who are very well intentioned who really do not I certainly identify as racist, but also genuinely do not think they are racist. We'll have want to welcome persons of any color into their church, for example, but have embraced this colorblind ideology, which means it becomes very difficult to talk about anything like structural inequality. It becomes very difficult to talk about racism because you aren't supposed to. When you bring up race, that is divisive. So don't talk about race. So what this ends up doing is the moderates, including many, well-intentioned people who are not reactionary extremists, at least, not knowingly so, end up giving cover to the explicit racists. And then when people are calling out the explicit racism inside these spaces, it's often the moderates who take offense. How dare you? How dare you call us racist? We are not racist. And you can just see then how this fuels this radicalization and builds this sense of resentment. But Barack Obama, yes, a very important moment. Following the presidency of George W. Bush, the evangelical president, who becomes increasingly less popular across the board over the course of his presidency. Uh, which then brings us to Barack Hussein Obama, the first Black president, of course. But what we see happening in 2008 is a small number of particularly young white evangelical voters defect, and they vote for Obama. Hope and change, right? This kind of colorblind, this is great, right? Isn't this what we wanted? Well, it's not what everybody wanted, certainly. And this is where you can see the right wing really double down. And they set out really to destroy his presidency, to destroy any chance of him getting a second term. That's their goal. You see the birther movement really take hold inside conservative evangelical spaces. Outside those spaces, you have Donald Trump. Inside those spaces, you have a lot of conservative white evangelical pastors also promoting, this conspiracy and just relentlessly attacking Obama. And again, I mentioned you have the Obergefell decision. And so there's this, what feels like a sea change, not just around LGBTQ rights with same-sex marriage, but just a sense, increasingly so, that white evangelicals had already lost the culture wars. Like it was almost a done deal. And so they need to dig in and understanding that they no longer have numbers on their side. And this is when you start to see an explicit abandonment of any commitment to democracy. Understanding that you don't have numbers on your side, you have to do something, a kind of last ditch effort. You have to take a last stand, and you can't play according to the rules anymore, because if you do, you're going to lose. And once you lose, you'll never get it back. And so you see this amping up over the course of Obama's presidency. And, I will say that as somebody who's been in and out of this culture, has observed them closely for a very long time, so patriotic, so, God bless America and all about the founding era, to see the pace at which so many have abandoned any commitment to democracy, to the Constitution, because of their sense of grievance or political agenda. Honestly, it has been not just disappointing, but really quite shocking. And to realize that, trying to say, well, what do you mean? What does this mean about democracy? Or, are you okay? Like in a democracy and in a pluralist society, sometimes you're going to lose. Sometimes you're going to have to compromise your values with, the values of other citizens. No compromise can be had with the devil, with evil, right? And so what you need to do is just grab all the power that you can while you can still do it.
I would obviously concur that seeing so many people say that they are incredibly patriotic and say all the right things about patriotism, yet show a clear abandonment to the Constitution and to democracy is just another layer where it needs to be called out, obviously, in a professional way. There was another huge moment, and it's taking place right now, which is when the Obama administration sued North Carolina over the bathroom bill. And what we are seeing now is this play out in real time, and also elections be won and lost with, I'm saying this as someone who tries to be as inclusive as possible. This should not be a wedge issue. This is a human rights issue. So Dobson, as you write, issued a desperate call to action to American men to defend their wives from men who dress like women in order to peer over bathroom stalls. That doesn't happen. And their little girls from men who walk in unannounced, unzip their pants, and urinate in front of them. If any of this had happened a century ago, quote, someone might have been shot. You wrote of Boykin, the first man who goes into the restroom, he would say, with my daughter, will not have to worry about surgery. Again, seeing this play out, as you write, from the Obama administration doing the right thing, and by the way, to bring sports into it, to see how far we've fallen, the NBA pulled the All-Star game from North Carolina over this piece of legislation. Now, I would I would bet my life savings. It does not matter the sport. They do not care about this stuff because it is not in their best interest. So, with all of that being said, was this a moment where they could find, as we've talked about, there are people within these circles who are anti-Semitic, leaders who are anti-Semitic. They are anti-women. They are anti-Muslim. Okay, well, those sort of ran out. Now we have to find a new group to target. Is that accurate?
Yeah, one thing that can be said for the Christian right is that they have been extremely well organized, well funded, and they have relentlessly worked on messaging and strategy, putting the left to shame, or certainly putting any moderates to shame. And so, Catherine Stewart is a journalist who has covered this. She's the author of the brand new book, Money, Lies, and God, but she's been covering this for 15 years. And she attends these conferences and she attends the strategy sessions, and she will tell you that they are always searching for the next issue, for the better issue, and they will run tests and they will see what lands. And in the last few years, I watched this in real time. And first it was CRT. You
Yep.
saw that emerge, and it didn't just emerge in secular spaces. In fact, you could see it starting in right-wing Christian spaces and inside kind of the right flank of the Southern Baptist Convention. You saw this, and again, it happened in real time where I speak and I write, and I'm a bit of a public figure in these spaces, and all of a sudden I was getting talks at Christian colleges canceled because the rumor was going around that I was a CRT activist. When literally, like a few months before I started seeing this bubble up, I literally had to Google what is CRT. I'm a historian. We're not really into theory. I just write about what happened in the past.
Right.
And then I'm getting banned from campus because I'm supposedly a CRT activist. I saw getting called out, very early on years ago on social media from some right-wing figures they were demanding that I offer my view on trans women in sports. And I was like, oh my gosh, unlike you, I do not really follow sports much. So I was like, I have no views on any sports, right? I've never even heard of this. Well, then a few months later, I see it become a kind of national issue, right? They're testing and they're trying to, get people on this issue. And that one had some it was solid for them. But the reality was like most conservative Christians didn't actually care that much about women's sports, right? Not really fans. It didn't seem super feminine.
Right.
And then they came on to a better version of that, which is the kind of mutilation of children, right? And so that's like the sweet spot of super vulnerable children. And, it is an issue that is complicated, and that is really not the day-to-day experience of the vast majority of Americans, right? And so it was one of these issues that could be, and I want to say there are some important medical considerations here, social considerations, and in religious spaces, theological considerations. But the issue was never presented as a, wow, let's really take a careful look at this and let's figure this out. It was, a kind of scapegoating and wedge issue. And that was the one that really had legs. And I mean, it's not that they abandoned all of them, but you can just kind of see the strategizing. And then you can see that, there is no interest. This is in driving these issues. There's not an interest in, in coming together and in analyzing the science, and in looking at studies, and in looking at numbers, and again some legitimate social questions that are difficult, that we'd have to work through together and find various compromises and ways of bringing pluralist visions together into a way that people can live with, kind of thing, right? So I don't want to diminish the difficulty here, but that is not the goal here, right? It very much is mobilizing a reactionary movement in a way that I would argue does harm all around.
I know you said you're not super familiar with what's going on in circles that revolve around sports. But did you see this question being asked by Illinois Senator Dick Durbin to the head of the NCAA, Charlie Baker, when he asked how many trans women are there in sports collegiately? And he said, did you see this?
I didn't know, but
Okay.
I've heard it's like, what is it, single digit?
He said less than 10. Now, I need people to understand how big college sports is and how less than 10 is so small. And yet this was the major driver, I mean, just to use one example, in this past election. And I mean, we'll get to Trump in a moment, but some of the things, sometimes he says, admitting something that he shouldn't, which when he said, I don't remember where it was, I remember hearing it, I remember seeing the video. He said he couldn't believe that this drove so many people to support him. And I was like, holy shit, I cannot believe he just said that. I can't believe that he just gave away the game to say, yeah, this is actually something that I didn't even think about, my team didn't think about. We just threw it out there and it stuck. I mean, we are talking about such a small amount of people, specifically in this context, NCAA sports, but they targeted it over and over and over again in ads. The buying of ads for less than 10 people is insane. That's insane.
And it worked.
And it worked.